So hi everybody. Will it click? Huh? Of course not. So I'll click on my notebook. Come on. Hi everyone, I'm Clara. I'm a product designer working mostly on platform at Sentinel-1, which if you haven't heard of Sentinel-1, which I hope you did, you have. We are a cybersecurity company. Before that, I worked at Oracle, and I'm also with Asociacja UX, the Czech Association of UX. And just to give a bit of a disclaimer, I do have some engineering background, but this talk really isn't aimed at engineers. It's aimed at designers and really helping you moving fast in your design process and utilizing the new tools to help you move faster and maybe dirty, but efficiently. So yeah, as you've already read, I came to talk about prototyping. And yes, I baited you, and I said that I would be talking about AI prototyping, and I will. But first, I want to stop at the word prototyping before I delve into the AI. So I hear a lot of misconception when it comes to prototyping. People talk about it, but talk about making it super close to the product and discussing whether using this tool makes it look more like your product or less. I don't care. That's not what prototyping really is about in its original sense. Prototyping is something that helps you accelerate the feedback loops, creating something that you can show to someone and get their feedback, whether it's worth continuing this direction or not. It's about validating ideas and getting alignment with your partners, with your developers, with your product managers. My own a bit of rephrasing of this is validating your idea confidently enough, and enough is enough, fast and cheap before you commit that you build it. First reminder about prototypes before I will get to the AI and I will get to some AI tips, don't worry. But bear in mind that prototypes are disposable. We're not building something that will be actually used. We are building something that will be shown to appropriate people, product managers, engineers, or your users, of course, importantly, your users, and they're disposable. It's not the final product. And second reminder, great prototypes were made on paper, so you don't really have to. There was a lot of great software actually tested on paper prototypes or then perhaps slightly more sophisticated tools, but paper used to be enough. So you don't have to really focus on making something perfect, but something that validates the idea. So yeah, if I say that paper is enough, I'm not necessarily saying that. But how does AI help, really? What's the new thing that AI brings us here? So in my perspective, first of all, it's acceleration. Sometimes some things, it can build much faster than if you were trying to do it on paper or if you were copy-pasting and pushing pixels in Figma. And what it can do is make a clickable prototype with actual interaction. So, think inputs, things, radio buttons that really click, which you can do in Figma prototype as well, but super manually. And with actual good mock data, because at the end of the day, it's based on LLMs, which work great with text. So it can actually fill your prototypes with quite good mock data, super fast. I'll show you how to get to very good results really fast. Much faster than if you were trying to do it in Figma, for like traditional Figma, I mean. The examples I'll show you will be made in Figma Make, actually. And also hardly achievable otherwise. So I remember all those discussions that I've had with many people, with many folks in the community defending Figma. It's fine that it can't do inputs. And if you really do need inputs, then for God's sake, make an HTML mockup. But I can make an HTML mockup. Not everyone can make an HTML mockup. And also, it takes more time than actually prompting a ChatGPT or Figma Make for that HTML mockup. So acceleration. You can make something much better, much faster. And the second use case for AI vibe coding, prototyping, whatever you want to call it, is also exploration. You can think of the AI as your quite skilled junior, new colleague that can generate, ideas that you, tired at the end of the day wouldn't have. Or like, I love design jams. I like asking my colleagues for their ideas. I can also make 10 more colleagues, in ChatGPT or, or in Figma Make, and explore way more ideas, and somehow getting the sense of how someone else would solve my problem for unexpected directions and my own inspiration. What's the main pitfall, though, is that garbage in is always garbage out. That's an old rule, which applies here as well. And so what do we do to kind of avoid this garbage out? It's very tempting to just open Figma Make or Lovable or V0. This talk really isn't about the specific tool. And write the first prompt. Of course, for many use cases, I do that myself. I just go type something and see what happens, because that's sometimes useful too. But for really good prototype, I think, it's worth doing the prep work. What I mean by the prep work, and I'll go into more detail, is really exploring those directions, kind of first conceptually think what you're actually building, and also kind of gathering all the context, really doing your research, doing the actual classic design process, not jumping into making something that looks good enough to a PM. No. So only after the prep work, I think that we can get to a first prompt that actually gets us from 0 to 1 to something that we can test without too much of a hallucination. If you don't do the prep work, and I say that's sometimes fine, you can get something really unexpected and something that you can't even use for that inspiration. But with that prep work, you can get 0 to 1 fast. And last kind of the step of this vibe coding process is the iteration, only to refine that prototype to that good enough state I've been stressing before. This is kind of as much for the theoretical part of this talk. Don't worry, now we're getting to the practical stuff. The most important thing is decide on intent. What actual thing you're testing with the prototype that you're about to build. Are you testing an interaction, whether it will be actually ergonomic for people to use the interactive thing that you're building, or is it more about the data? So you need to show them something data-wise realistic. Then it's about gathering all the context. As at Sentinel-1, we have an amazing tool called Glean that I don't have mentioned here, which pulls all of the company knowledge into one central chat-like interface. So I can ask about past decisions, I can ask about research, I can ask about all different kinds of stuff. But if you have, for example, ChatGPT license available, you can just pull your research data and maybe even some JIRA tickets there, just to prep the work. By the way, always just use what you have license for. I don't want to kind of persuade you to use something that's not allowed at your company. So always check that before you do anything. Also, to do competitive research, I often, since I'm a platform designer most of the time, I ask a lot about interaction patterns in other enterprise SaaS software. But it's also about, if someone else, traditional competitive research like you're used to, just much faster. Again, this is about speed as well. And I also just brainstorm conceptual ideas. And at the end, of this process, I'm really trying to kind of know who my persona is again, traditional, not AI related, right? I know my context, in what context I'm building it, the goal, not only of the prototype, but also of the project, of course. And I have a rough direction of my idea in mind. Some tips. Don't know if you knew that, but you can ask ChatGPT for ASCII wireframes. And that's helpful when you want to see, really rough sketches of multiple ideas. When you ask it for 10 ideas, it can actually generate ASCII wireframes, which is much faster and also better when you try to ask it for wireframes. Don't recommend. It just hallucinates a picture that doesn't even resemble a wireframe. But when you want 10 ideas, it can roughly sketch, for these smaller kinds of things. It's excellent. And also, before you jump into Figma Make, maybe sometimes you don't even have to. This is an example. You can ask for a simple demo in a small web application that demonstrates something. So the other day, I was talking to ChatGPT about keyboard shortcuts in tables, and kind of accessibility patterns and standards in navigating tables. And At the end of the conversation, I was like, yeah, but I don't have to be explaining this to the developer who's going to build it. I can just ask the ChatGPT at the end of the chat to actually make it as an HTML mockup. And that's what I sent the developer, so that he could try what I was explaining out, and he got the idea much better. This is kind of a bridge to the actual first prompt that I kind of promised. What will be probably shared for most of the prompt is providing the context and the clear instructions. So create, and what you're creating. Are you creating a screen? Are you creating a flow? Are you creating a component? Inside, and please do mention what your product is, what your platform is. So for example, I always mention for our security operations admin console, blah, 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 because it can help a lot. It helps it narrow down what it actually fills it with, because it has the general domain knowledge of your products very often. I don't want to estimate that, but I believe. So that, and high-level goal. So it's a bit like a story in a sense, but not really. I think that by now you've seen some prompting best practices, but this is, for me, the most important part. Give it the goal, like what it'll be useful for. I think that oftentimes, I don't do it always, but oftentimes also mention the persona and the user goal. Again, it's because it kind of can pull out of the internet what these people usually do. It can understand the persona, and it can adapt the design just as you would as designers. The intended result. So, and I'll get to this, but this is really roughly describing your idea of what you expect to happen. So, what the output should do in literal structured language, avoid storytelling. It doesn't have to know that, Clara is, I don't know, walking by the street when she thinks of, painting butterflies. I don't know. Avoid the extra fluff, as I say. It can unnecessarily appear in your prototype. Just explain what you want, really. Reference material, and this is perhaps one of the most important and dear things to me. It does help to attach sketches. And when I say sketches, I mean sketches. I don't mean wireframes using your favorite wireframe kit in Figma. I mean rectangles, circles, and plain text put in a PNG in whatever tool you use. Sometimes I use TLDraw. Sometimes I open an empty Figma file, and I literally make an empty frame and draw the rectangles, because that's the simplest form you can use, and that's the whiteboard you have when explaining that thing to your assistant. Imagine that you just drew, it's supposed to have like these two columns, and when you click, they kind of resize like this. Imagine explaining on a whiteboard. That's what helps greatly. I'll show you a demo right away. Screenshots are great as well. Structured data are excellent. I'll show you that'll be the most demo-y thing that I'll show you right away. But the very important part, does this have? Yes. But the very important part is that you gotta say how the AI should interpret what you're attaching. If you do not claim that and attach a sketch, then you might be surprised with the result, because then, for example, Figma might interpret it as the actual design, and you do end up with the gray rectangles. So we'll provide the instruction how to interpret the attachments. And finally, if you have any other constraints like style or tone of voice, whatever else, you can attach it as well. I don't do it very often because we have our own template, and I usually build wireframe thingies anyway. But this is the place. I'll let you, if someone wants to take a picture of the complete slide, this is your chance. Some example, which I generated with ChatGPT, but I hope it's good enough. I sadly cannot show you my specific examples from my work, because we're a cybersecurity company, and it's very, very secure and secret. But you see, create a responsive web app, blah, 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 that helps users, blah, blah. The primary user is a voter or journalist who wants to, blah, blah, blah. Include, we don't have to care about this. But this part, again, I'll care about this one. Use attach sketch for layout proportions and slider positioning. Attach screenshot for chart color palette. So see, I'm telling it, treat the sketch as a sketch. Very important. I say, use the attach screenshot to get a sense of the colors, of the styling, not to necessarily recreate it. Also, it may attempt that if you don't tell it not to do it otherwise. And attach CSV for initial party data for simulation. Use a neutral, accessible data visualization style, white background, blah, blah. This is an example prompt. I actually haven't run this one. I prepared a different demo. Before I get there, just a note, you can experiment with the fidelity of the prompts. I actually do that oftentimes. I sometimes open 4 Figma Make projects, and in some I leave some of the details, in some I add some of the details, and actually I kind of, as a human, I curate it. Sometimes I notice that it has an idea here, it has other idea there, and it's actually also a way to explore directions. Also, another important tip is to have a base template. So of course, it depends on what tool you use. But in Figma Make, you can save something as a template, like a starting point for your next projects. So again, this is not our actual console. This is, again, something that I built for the purpose of the presentation. But you see that, for example, good thing is to have the shell, like the basic UI of your application. Not perfect, not detailed, but something that mimics it, that you always can start from so that you don't recreate it every time. Also, personal experience, but I'm saying that as an enterprise software designer. At least our Figma designs, are way too complex. It's because we have a lot of untrivial components. It has many layers. Of course, we have many tables. And the limitation of any AI tool is always its context window. And if you feed it with super complex Figma design, it gets stuck there already. And honestly, like I do sketches. They're best. They're least context possible. And when I do want to attach some more complex design, I actually use PNG. But that's my personal preference, my personal experience. Maybe I believe that this will be improving as Figma Make improves, other tools improve, and as the context windows of the LLMs, underlying LLMs grow as well. The demo that I was looking forward to the whole time. So if I want you to carry one thing out of this talk, is to embrace using structured data and the simple sketches as your starting point for actual good prototypes that help you really go from 0 to 1 very fast. Again, a demo that I made up a demo I made for this presentation, but hopefully demonstrating enough. So what we are building is, this is the actual prompt that I did use and that you'll see a result of. Build a settings screen for an e-commerce merchant. Again, you see, I'm mentioning the context. I just don't say settings screen out of context. Dashboard using the attached sketch and structured data. I'll show you them. Each section in the data should appear as a sidebar, blah, 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 blah. I'm describing a bit the attachments. Use the JSON attached below for each settings section, blah, blah, blah. Make whole page scrollable with settings section navigation behaving as scroll spy. Exciting, I would spend 2 or 3 hours making that in Figma Make otherwise, in Figma Design. These are my inputs. I literally made them on the train to Ostrava. You see on the left, there's some blue rectangles that I actually mention in the prompt as replace blue rectangles by a shell of the CRM, make the top bar and the main menu where the settings are the last item. You see, so I reference the blue rectangles in the sketch in the prompt. I make the reference. I describe to that assistant how to read my dirty sketch. And on the right, you see I generated that in ChatGPT, but you see that it's essentially a JSON with the settings sections and with the actual input fields of the configuration, with the label, the type, and even some default data. And this is what, with that single prompt, with those data, and with that sketch, it built. You see, there's actual menu, looks okay. There's actual tab bar, looks okay. And sadly, on free plan of Figma slides, I can't have video. But the scroll spy actually works. I can actually click on some of the items in the settings navigation, and it scrolls me to that given part of the settings. And it took, like, what, 10 to 15 minutes to build something that really behaves like a scroll spy. When I would use it, maybe just to demonstrate to my PM what a scroll spy is in the first place, and to get a sense of how actual settings could look like. I'm not saying that's a real example from my work, but actually did something very similar using our actual researched proposed contents of that given screen. It wasn't particular settings of something, but it was very similar. And it took literally no time, and it was below half an hour using all of the AI tools I mentioned on the way, versus me spending, I don't know, a day on making that prototype somehow. Extra tip is that actually, maybe I thought that the scroll spy wasn't that great idea either, and I was lazy to think of some other layout possibilities myself. So what I also like to do is actually asking for kind of variants inside of the prototype. So here I asked, think of 2 alternative layouts of the screen. Make a drop-down switch in the bottom right of the screen that switches between this one and the other 2. And what I ended up with, actually in the bottom right corner, I can switch and see how it would look like tabs or how it would look like an accordion. Simple, right? Before I figured that out, and when I figured this out, I was so proud of myself, and I do that very often. Some iteration tips. We are getting to the final tips. What you can, when you're iterating on the prototypes, when you're using UI like Figma Maker V0, what you can change with the focus mode, where you select the item and you say, change the font size, blah, blah. What you can do that with the focus mode, or in code if you can. It's usually, even if you can't code and you go to code, I think that most of people would pick up very quickly where to edit what. And also, I recommend to making after you have that good starting point, we put a lot of work into the first prompt. After that, I'd switch the approach, and I would do one make at a time, one prompt at a time, because if you want to go back, then maybe you ask for four things. 2 it did well, 2 it didn't do well, but then you have to revert even those 2 that it did well. So one step at a time, recommended. And annotating, screenshotting what it did wrong and annotating it, and then giving it back saying, here I annotated how it's wrong, or if you, again, sketch how something should behave, it helps a lot, and it's always so much more powerful than trying to explain it in words. You always like a whiteboard when you try to explain something, right? One side note before the final tips that are, again, a bit more philosophical. Where I see the difference between the, I call it vibe coding tools. We can, discuss the terminology, but, what's the biggest difference when using Make, Lovable, V0, or other things versus some of the actual AI IDEs like Cursor or Windsurf? I personally used Make and Windsurf a lot. I think that I use that 98% of the time because I need something quick. I don't want the setup. And it helps me really build 0 to 1 prototypes very quickly. It only sometimes hits the limit when you're at version, I don't know, 50 or more, and it starts getting confused by itself. So the context is the enemy, with super complex things. And also sometimes it's not great, the linear versioning. What I mean by that is that you only can go to previous version, but you don't have any real branching and stuff. So when you do that, when you do want that, that's where Cursor and Windsurf are definitely more powerful. If you're building an actual POC, connecting even, I don't know, to APIs and whatever else, and using your actual libraries and stuff, much better, and actually only there possible. And also you have the Git there, and also what's great compared to Make at this point at least is that you can open multiple chats. So Make often gets confused by the length of the chat, but in Cursor or Windsurf you just open a new chat and you start discussing a new thing that you want to add to the prototype. So that's the biggest difference, I think. The tip for the vibe coding is duplicate early. I often have many files of the same thing, but so that I have kind of committed versions that I can go back to otherwise than just in the chat, and that I can actually somehow mimic branching from as well. So duplicate early. Once you have a stable something, duplicate it before you make further changes. Some final tips to close this up. I'm just a minute behind, not that bad. Important is communication. Like in any classic design process or prototyping, you have to communicate what the prototype actually shows, and not when, but what are its limits. Sorry about the typo. So, this doesn't look like our design system, I know, but please give me feedback on the micro interaction of this thing. Thank you. Be also kind of aware as a designer of, I called it fallacy of doneness. You can end up with something that looks really great, that interaction looks great, data look great, but as it's very complete, you may miss the detail. That's why we've always done sketches and wireframes, so that we focus on the important stuff. You have to kind of back project to this project this as well. But on the other hand, you can treat the hallucination as a feature. So when I'm making some interaction, sometime it thinks of a very small micro interaction that I haven't thought of myself. So it's also good to be curious and look for these Easter eggs that the AI might have done for you in the prototype for further inspiration. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for the attention. I look forward to the questions. And if you want, get in touch. I'm on LinkedIn, as everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. We need to be really fast, so let's make 2 questions. What was the name of the service that gathered all company info? Glean, Clean?
Glean, G-L-E-A-N.
Okay, that was an easy one. The second one is a bit more complicated. How do you deal with hidden bugs that can break user flow when you don't have it under 100% control because it is generated?
It's true that sometimes I do start from scratch. I also take the precautions, like duplicating before making further changes while I have something that is stable and bugless. And yes, sometimes I just do go back to it and start anew if I got tangled in the context of the chat, and I try rephrasing what I wanted before I get to the results. And yeah, if I really want to have the good control, then the windsurf again might be a better idea, or cursor.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
I
know that you had more questions for Clara, but she will be here at the conference, right? Somewhere around, so you can still ask her. Thanks again.